Have you ever wondered how a single story can encapsulate the weight of an entire nation's history, culture, and struggles? The 1997 film 7 Years in Tibet dares to take us on such a journey. Based on Austrian mountaineer Heinrich Harrer's memoir, it's not just a tale of adventure but a profound exploration of self-discovery amidst political upheaval and cultural transformation. Yet, like any retelling of history, it raises questions. Does it capture the truth? Or does it weave a narrative too simplistic for the rich, complex tapestry of Tibetan history? The Enigma of Ngapoi Ngawang Jigme. Ngapoi Ngawang Jigme, a name that echoes through the annals of Tibetan history. Was he a pragmatic leader striving to navigate the impossible? Or a figure caught in the harsh tides of history? As a key negotiator of the controversial 17-point agreement with the People's Republic of China in 1951, Ngapoi's role sparks debate even today. This agreement, while promising autonomy and religious freedom, became a symbol of Tibet's loss of sovereignty. Critics argue it was signed under duress, a tragic compromise forced upon a proud nation. The complexities of Ngapoi's choices cannot be understood without considering the broader geopolitical landscape of the time. Tibet, perched precariously between powerful neighbors, found itself facing an existential crisis. The Chinese invasion of 1950 presented Tibetan leaders with a stark reality: to resist and risk devastation or to negotiate and preserve what they could of their unique culture and way of life. Ngapoi, by stepping into the role of negotiator, assumed an unenviable responsibility, one that demanded an acute understanding of the stakes and the limitations of Tibet's position on the global stage. For many Tibetans, the 17-point agreement represents a bitter memory, one laden with loss and betrayal. Yet, it is important to remember that Ngapoi was not operating in a vacuum. The Chinese military presence loomed over Tibet like a dark shadow, and international support for Tibetan independence was virtually non-existent. Under such circumstances, was it truly possible for Ngapoi to achieve a more favorable outcome? Or was his signature on the agreement an act of survival, a calculated risk aimed at securing at least a semblance of Tibet's autonomy? The film's portrayal of Ngapoi as surrendering to the Chinese forces has been denounced as oversimplified and misleading. History is rarely black and white, and figures like Ngapoi remind us of the shades of gray that define human decisions. Isn't it the same in life? We all grapple with choices that challenge our ideals and survival instincts. What would we do if faced with similar dilemmas? How often do we find ourselves standing at the crossroads of principle and pragmatism? To some, Ngapoi's role in Tibetan history casts him as a traitor, a man who capitulated to an oppressive regime. To others, he is seen as a realist, someone who did what was necessary to minimize the suffering of his people. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Leadership under such extreme circumstances often demands difficult compromises, and Ngapoi's actions underscore the painful reality that not all decisions are born from freedom, many emerge from necessity. Ngapoi's legacy, though controversial, invites us to think deeply about the challenges of leadership under immense pressure. Leaders like him must navigate treacherous waters, balancing their personal convictions with the demands of their time. Is it fair to judge historical figures solely by their actions, without understanding the context in which they operated? The story of Ngapoi reminds us to look beyond the surface and seek the humanity within. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of Ngapoi's story is its universality. His life forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of leadership, the cost of compromise, and the weight of historical judgment. If we were in his place, burdened with the responsibility of preserving a nation's heritage under the threat of annihilation, would we have chosen differently? Could we have done better, or would we too have succumbed to the pressures of the time? In examining Ngapoi's life, we are not just reflecting on Tibetan history, we are engaging with timeless questions about morality, power, and the human condition. His story serves as a mirror, challenging us to consider the choices we make in our own lives, the compromises we accept, and the values we hold dear. Whether seen as a hero, a pragmatist, or a flawed human being, Ngapoi Ngawang Jigme remains a figure whose legacy resonates far beyond the borders of Tibet, compelling us to grapple with the complexities of history and the enduring struggle for identity and autonomy. The Dalai Lama, a symbol of resilience. Can you imagine carrying the weight of an entire people on your shoulders at the tender age of 15? The 14th Dalai Lama did just that, navigating Tibet through one of its most tumultuous eras. Born into a simple farming family in the remote village of Taksar, he was recognized as the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama and thrust into a role of immense spiritual and political responsibility. At such a young age, he was not only tasked with leading Tibet but also preserving the sacred traditions and cultural heritage of his people. His eventual exile in 1959 was more than a personal journey. It was the beginning of a spiritual and political movement that transcended borders. Reflecting on his story, one cannot help but admire his unyielding commitment to non-violence and compassion. Doesn't his life teach us that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, one can choose the path of peace? The Dalai Lama's exile echoes the struggles of his predecessors, such as the 13th Dalai Lama, who fled twice to escape invasions. These parallels reveal a historical continuity of resilience that defines Tibetan identity. Each flight was not a retreat but a strategic choice to ensure survival, a testament to the resilience of the Tibetan spirit, a spirit that refuses to be broken, even when the world turns a blind eye. The 14th Dalai Lama inherited this legacy of fortitude, proving time and again that courage is not the absence of fear but the triumph over it. His journey from Lhasa to Dharamsala, across the perilous Himalayan terrain, symbolizes a broader human struggle for freedom and dignity. Can we summon such courage in our lives when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds? What sacrifices are we willing to make to uphold our values and protect what we hold dear? In exile, the Dalai Lama transformed from a regional leader into a global symbol of peace and compassion. Far from the monasteries and landscapes of Tibet, he built a new home in India, not just for himself but for thousands of Tibetans who followed him into exile. Through his leadership, the Tibetan government in exile became a model of democratic governance, emphasizing collective decision-making and transparency. His teachings on interconnectedness and the importance of inner peace have inspired millions, transcending cultural and religious boundaries. What does this tell us about the power of ideas? Even when stripped of political power, the Dalai Lama's influence grew through the strength of his convictions and his ability to connect with people on a profound level. His ability to adapt to the modern world while preserving ancient wisdom showcases the universal relevance of his message. It challenges us to consider, how do we define true leadership? Is it rooted in authority, or does it stem from a deeper well of moral clarity? The Dalai Lama's story is also a lesson in resilience and hope. Despite losing his homeland, he continues to advocate tirelessly for Tibetan autonomy, not through violence but through dialogue and mutual understanding. His emphasis on the middle way approach, a strategy seeking genuine autonomy for Tibet within the framework of the Chinese constitution, underscores his dedication to peace and coexistence. It reminds us that true leadership is not about asserting dominance but about fostering harmony. In an age of polarization and conflict, his unwavering commitment to these principles offers a beacon of hope. How often do we encounter leaders willing to prioritize unity over division, compassion over anger, and long-term harmony over short-term gain? Ultimately, the Dalai Lama's life serves as a reminder of the human capacity to endure and inspire, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. His journey is not merely a narrative of personal perseverance, it is a call to action for all of us. It invites us to reflect on our own lives, our struggles, and our choices. Can we, like him, find the strength to rise above adversity with grace and kindness? Can we use our own challenges as opportunities to grow and contribute to the greater good? The Dalai Lama's enduring influence proves that even the smallest acts of compassion and understanding can ripple out to create profound change. Through his example, he challenges us to not only imagine but also to actively work toward a world where resilience, peace, and compassion prevail. Gilo Thondup, a brother's dual role. Gilo Thondup, the Dalai Lama's elder brother, adds another layer of complexity. From spearheading CIA-supported resistance efforts to acting as an envoy for negotiations with Beijing, his journey is a paradox of resistance and reconciliation. Isn't life often like that? A dance between opposing forces, where every step is fraught with uncertainty? Thondup's actions remind us that the fight for justice often demands adaptability and pragmatism, even when it feels like betrayal to some. How do we reconcile our ideals with the compromises we must sometimes make to survive? Thondup's collaboration with the CIA in the late 1950s and early 1960s marked a dramatic chapter in Tibet's resistance against Chinese control. With the covert support of the CIA, he facilitated the training of Tibetan guerrillas in the United States and in secret bases in Asia. These operations were daring, driven by the hope of reclaiming Tibet's autonomy. Yet, as with many such alliances, the partnership was marked by impermanence. The covert operations faltered under shifting geopolitical priorities, especially as the United States began to pursue détente with China. The abandonment of Tibetan fighters who risked everything exposes the fragility of alliances forged in the crucible of strategic convenience. What does this teach us about the dynamics of global politics? That promises made by powerful nations often evaporate when their interests demand it, leaving smaller or marginalized groups to grapple with the fallout. Yet, this chapter of betrayal and resilience is not the full story of Thondup's life. His later role as a negotiator with Beijing highlights a different facet of his character, a willingness to seek dialogue, even with those seen as adversaries. For many, this pivot from resistance to reconciliation could appear contradictory. How could someone who once orchestrated armed defiance now sit across the table from those he fought against? However, Thondup's journey underscores a profound truth, that survival and the pursuit of justice often require navigating the gray areas of morality. His willingness to engage in talks with Beijing, despite knowing the deep distrust and emotional scars that existed, reveals his pragmatic approach to an impossible situation. Isn't this duality a reflection of the human condition itself? Thondup's life, in this sense, is a mirror held up to history. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that ideals alone cannot always dictate the path forward. The lines between heroism and compromise blur in the shadow of realpolitik. His decisions, though polarizing, remind us that fighting for a cause often demands sacrifices that go beyond the battlefield, sacrifices of certainty, of pride, and sometimes of principle. If nothing else, Thondup's story invites us to ask difficult questions. What is the price of loyalty? And how do we measure success in the face of insurmountable odds? The paradox of Gilo Thondup's life, shaped by resistance and reconciliation, is not just the story of a man but a reflection of Tibet's own struggle for identity and survival. His journey reveals the precarious balance between holding on to ideals and adapting to harsh realities. Perhaps it is this balance that defines not only his legacy but also the essence of resilience in the face of overwhelming challenges. Tibet, a land of contrasts. Tibet before Chinese reforms was a land of stunning contrasts, a theocratic society with a deeply spiritual culture yet bound by a rigid feudal system. It was a place where the mystical and the mundane coexisted, where breathtaking monasteries symbolized a deeply rooted spiritual life, and where the vast majority of people lived under the dominance of landowners and a hierarchy that defined every aspect of their existence. The arrival of Chinese communist policies disrupted this delicate balance, claiming to liberate the oppressed but simultaneously dismantling cherished traditions and structures that had shaped Tibetan identity for centuries. Can one truly liberate by force? Can the imposition of a new order, no matter how progressive it might seem, ever replace the organic evolution of a society? These philosophical questions linger. What is freedom if it comes at the cost of identity? And at what point does liberation blur into cultural erasure? This dichotomy underscores Tibet's ongoing struggle. The preservation of ancient wisdom in a world that demands modernization poses profound challenges. Is it possible to integrate traditional values into a rapidly globalizing world without losing their essence? How do we honor the past while embracing the future? Tibet's story forces us to confront these questions, not just as an abstract cultural dilemma but as a reflection of struggles within our own lives. How do we balance tradition and innovation, roots and growth, stability and change? The introduction of land reforms by the Chinese government was hailed by some as a progressive step toward equality. It promised to free serfs from the yoke of feudal landlords and redistribute wealth in a manner that aligned with communist ideals. However, for many Tibetans, these policies felt like an assault on their way of life. Land was more than a source of livelihood, it was intricately tied to spiritual beliefs, local customs, and familial legacies. The destruction of monasteries, seen as centers of both education and spiritual guidance, and the erosion of cultural practices left deep scars that transcended physical loss. For a people whose identity is interwoven with their spiritual heritage, these changes were not merely economic, they were existential. How do we measure progress? Is it purely economic, defined by material wealth and infrastructure development? Or does it also encompass the preservation of cultural and spiritual values that define a community's soul? Tibet's experience urges us to reconsider our understanding of development and modernization. In the rush to build a new future, how much of the past should be sacrificed? The scars left by these policies serve as a poignant reminder that progress cannot simply be measured in GDP or industrial output. True development must account for the intangible elements of a society, its beliefs, its traditions, and its connection to the land and history that define it. Tibet's story remains a powerful testament to the complexities of cultural transformation. It is a narrative of resilience and resistance, of a people striving to maintain their identity in the face of overwhelming change. It challenges us to rethink the meaning of freedom and progress in our own contexts, to question the costs we are willing to bear for modernization, and to explore ways in which tradition and innovation can coexist harmoniously. The geopolitical chessboard. Tibet's significance extends far beyond its borders. Perched at the crossroads of powerful nations, its fate has always been entangled with global geopolitics. The CIA's covert operations in Tibet during the Cold War, while aimed at countering communism, left lasting scars. It's a sobering reminder of how the ambitions of nations often overshadow the voices of the people they claim to protect. In this grand chessboard of global power, Tibet stands as a poignant symbol, a small piece with enormous significance, yet so often overlooked. Doesn't this reflect the plight of many marginalized communities across the world? How often do the aspirations of the powerless get subsumed by the machinations of the powerful? Strategic crossroads in global dynamics. Tibet's geopolitical importance stems from its unique position as a high-altitude plateau that borders major nations such as India, China, Nepal, and Bhutan. Its location at the heart of Asia gives it a pivotal role in determining regional security dynamics. To China, Tibet serves as a strategic buffer zone against potential adversaries like India. Control over Tibet secures China's western frontier, ensuring territorial integrity while limiting foreign influence in this sensitive region. Additionally, Tibet's rugged terrain and altitude offer a natural barrier, which has historically been viewed as a line of defense against incursions. The role of water resources. One of Tibet's most critical contributions to geopolitics lies in its vast water resources. Known as the Third Pole or the Water Tower of Asia, Tibet is the source of several major rivers, including the Yangtze, Mekong, Brahmaputra, and Indus, that sustain billions of people across Asia. Control over these water sources gives China significant leverage over downstream nations like India, Bangladesh, and Southeast Asian countries, amplifying Tibet's importance in regional power dynamics. Dams and hydroelectric projects initiated by China in Tibetan regions have sparked international concern, not only for environmental impacts but also for the potential use of water as a political tool. Cultural and political dimensions. For the Tibetan people, this geopolitical chess game is deeply personal. The struggle is not merely about land but about preserving their identity, culture, and religious practices. Chinese policies of assimilation, through infrastructure development, migration incentives for Han Chinese settlers, and restrictions on Tibetan Buddhism, have fueled resentment and protests within Tibet. These actions underscore a broader trend of cultural suppression, raising questions about the ethical responsibilities of major powers in such conflicts. Cold War legacy and beyond. The Cold War left an indelible mark on Tibet. The CIA's covert support for Tibetan resistance fighters in the 1950s and 1960s, intended to counter communist expansion, became a double-edged sword. While it provided momentary hope for Tibetan independence, the withdrawal of U.S. support after the Sino-American rapprochement left the Tibetan resistance isolated and vulnerable. This history exemplifies how the interplay of global powers often prioritizes strategic convenience over long-term justice for smaller nations or communities. A global reflection. The Tibetan plight mirrors struggles faced by many marginalized groups across the globe. Whether in the form of cultural erasure, political subjugation, or environmental exploitation, Tibet exemplifies how local voices are often drowned out in the clamor of geopolitical strategy. The question remains, how can international communities balance strategic interests with ethical imperatives? Tibet serves as a reminder that the world's small pieces on the geopolitical chessboard often carry the weight of entire civilizations, histories, and aspirations. The challenge lies in ensuring they are not just pawns in the power games of stronger nations. The unyielding light of Tibetan Buddhism. Through all the turmoil, the spiritual heart of Tibet beats on, illuminating paths of compassion, resilience, and wisdom. Tibetan Buddhism, deeply rooted in the Himalayan highlands, extends far beyond its geographical origins, reaching into the hearts of countless individuals worldwide. Its profound teachings on compassion and mindfulness serve as an antidote to the modern world's struggles with materialism, division, and disconnection. The Dalai Lama's unwavering message of universal responsibility and kindness strikes a timeless chord, reminding humanity of the shared thread that binds us all. In a world fractured by conflict and uncertainty, isn't this ancient wisdom exactly what we desperately need to mend the cracks and foster harmony? The resilience of Tibetan Buddhism is nothing short of extraordinary, a testament to the indomitable strength of faith and the unyielding power of hope. Despite decades of suppression, displacement, and exile, the teachings of Tibetan spiritual leaders remain an enduring source of inspiration for millions across the globe. The Dalai Lama, often referred to as the embodiment of compassion, exemplifies the possibility of transcending personal and collective suffering to bring light to even the darkest corners of existence. Doesn't this profound endurance remind us that when we align with wisdom and compassion, we find the strength to weather even the most devastating storms? Isn't it a call to each of us to nurture that inner light and let it shine, regardless of external challenges? Buddhism's emphasis on inner peace and mindfulness has found resonance far beyond the monasteries perched on Tibet's rugged peaks. As modern societies increasingly grapple with the relentless pace of life, growing stress, and the alienation of hyperconnectivity, the ancient practices of Tibetan monks emerge as a guiding beacon. The deliberate focus on cultivating inner harmony offers not only relief but also a roadmap to living a more meaningful and interconnected life. Imagine what could happen if we collectively embraced these teachings of compassion, interdependence, and mindfulness. Could the growing epidemic of loneliness find solace in the warmth of shared humanity? Could the divisive forces of hatred and greed give way to a world where understanding and generosity reign? Perhaps the greatest gift of Tibetan Buddhism lies in its invitation to transform the way we see ourselves and others. It encourages a shift from self-centered existence to one of collective well-being, reminding us that our happiness is intricately tied to the happiness of others. If each of us made a conscious effort to incorporate even a fraction of these principles into our lives, pausing to reflect, choosing kindness over judgment, and embracing the interconnected nature of all beings, wouldn't the world become a kinder, more compassionate place? Tibetan Buddhism doesn't merely present a philosophy, it offers a profound way of being, urging us to embody the wisdom of the ages and become the change we wish to see. This timeless wisdom, born in the snowy peaks of Tibet, continues to ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring change. The teachings of Tibetan Buddhism remind us that no matter how turbulent the world may seem, the path to peace and understanding begins within. As we look to the future, may we heed its call, not just as individuals seeking solace, but as a collective yearning for a brighter, more compassionate world. The unyielding light of Tibetan Buddhism serves as a guiding star, illuminating the boundless potential within us all to create a world where wisdom, compassion, and hope prevail. The legacy of 7 years in Tibet. The film itself is a paradox, a work of art that straddles the delicate line between storytelling and historical responsibility. While it undeniably brings global attention to Tibet's plight, it simultaneously stirs controversy for its historical inaccuracies and selective portrayal of events. This duality, however, underscores the power of cinema, not merely as entertainment, but as a medium capable of provoking thought and challenging perspectives. It raises a crucial question: can art ever truly capture the nuances of history, or does it inevitably simplify complex realities to fit the narrative mold? Perhaps the film's greatest achievement lies in its ability to spark dialogue, to compel audiences worldwide to ask questions and seek deeper truths about Tibet, its people, and its struggles. Isn't that, after all, the ultimate purpose of art? To make us think, feel, and question the status quo. Through its sweeping cinematography and dramatic retelling, 7 Years in Tibet becomes more than a story. It is a mirror reflecting both our fascination with distant cultures and our failure to fully grasp their realities. The polarized reception of the film reflects the enduring sensitivity of Tibetan issues in global discourse. Supporters of the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan cause see it as a rare platform to highlight decades of grievances, from cultural suppression to political marginalization. To them, the film represents a beacon of awareness, urging the global community to pay attention to Tibet's ongoing struggle for autonomy and cultural preservation. Critics, however, often dismiss the film as romanticized propaganda, accusing it of glossing over the more troubling aspects of Tibet's history and portraying the region through a Western-centric lens. They argue that the narrative prioritizes the experiences of foreign characters, such as Heinrich Harrer, over the Tibetan people themselves, reducing their agency to the background of a personal redemption arc. This clash of perspectives mirrors the broader complexities of Tibet's history and its portrayal in the modern world. It is a reminder of the challenges inherent in representing contested histories, especially when they involve cultural and political struggles that remain unresolved. Yet, despite its imperfections, 7 Years in Tibet achieves something remarkable. It ensures that Tibet remains part of the global conversation. It invites viewers to grapple with questions of imperialism, spirituality, and identity in a rapidly globalizing world. Through its controversies and contradictions, the film reflects the layered, multifaceted reality of Tibet, a reality that defies simple narratives and continues to inspire debate, passion, and reflection. Final reflections. As we ponder Tibet's history, we are reminded of life's inherent complexities. There are no easy answers, no clear villains or heroes. The story of Tibet, like all great stories, is one of resilience, transformation, and the eternal struggle to find harmony between opposing forces. It's a reflection of the human condition itself, a journey fraught with challenges but also brimming with hope. And so, we ask, what can we learn from Tibet's struggles? How can we, in our own lives, balance tradition and change, resistance and reconciliation, power and compassion? Perhaps, in seeking these answers, we will find not just Tibet's truth, but our own. The story of 7 Years in Tibet is not just a narrative about a faraway land. It is a mirror, reflecting our own human experience, a tale of beauty, loss, hope, and the quest for meaning in an ever-changing world. What will we take from it? How will it shape our understanding of history, of ourselves, and of our shared future? Tibet's story continues to unfold, reminding us that the pursuit of justice, the preservation of culture, and the quest for peace are universal struggles. As we reflect on the lessons of history, may we find the strength to act with compassion, the wisdom to seek truth, and the courage to stand for what is right.